Okay, so I think Anne is going to read that. Anne?
Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to read our group values. It's also up on the screen for you. Trust, open-mindedness, assume positive intent, listen with intent, safety to be brave and vulnerable, effective communication, multiple intelligences and different learning styles. We strive to not take things personally, not make assumptions, do our best, and be impeccable to our word.
Excuse me for a sec. Could we ask people to mute? Please, everybody doesn't have that message.
Please mute everyone. Your screen, I think iPad 8 is not muted. Maybe I can mute. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. Feel comfortable clarifying things with questions. Be free to call out bias. Step up or step back up. Wait. Be mindful of your level of contribution. Passion and compassion are a value for us. Compromise. Comfort with ambiguity. Perseverance.
Is that the? I think I'll mute here so that I'm not.
We're having, if you could mute, that would be great. Thank you.
You know, the host could mute everybody.
Yes, Claudia, can you mute everybody and then Anne can unmute herself? I don't know how to mute everybody.
Thank you. You did it. We were at integrity, perseverance, self-care, and community care. Talk to each other, not about each other. And we as a group take care of one another. And we all thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Anne.
And Claudia, when you can you advance? Oh, you did. So here's our Zoom housekeeping, folks. Keep your sound off and less talking. In the participants box, at the bottom of the box, there is a feature with a raised hand. If you want to speak, would you please use that? If available, if you are on your phone, you can press *9 to both raise your hand and put it back down. Turn off the video if you are not present, not a presenter. Use the chat box to communicate needs to staff. Claudia and myself, Judith, are your staff this evening. We have been working hard to try to keep people from Zoom bombing or being disrespectful in the meetings. We will remove you from the meeting if we hear hateful language, disruptful behavior, or noises. Not all meetings are recorded, but this one will be. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up about that. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much. Back to you, Elliot.
Okay, thanks, Judith. And thank you, Claudia and Theo in absentia for setting up this meeting and doing all the hard work behind the scenes. So I wanted to start by introducing the PCCEP members to you, some of whom I know are here. If you are a PCCEP member, please private message me so I can call on you. Anne, why don't you start by introducing yourself and saying which subcommittees you're on?
Hello again, I'm Ann Campbell. I'm one of the new members of PCCEP, and I'm on the Behavioral Health Subcommittee meeting. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thanks, Anne. Lakayana?
Lakayana, co-chair of PCCEP on the Racial Equity Subcommittee, among other things.
Thanks. Vadim?
Hello, everybody. Vadim Mazursky. I'm the Secretary of PCCEP and also on the Settlement Agreement and Policy Committee, as well as the Behavioral Health Subcommittee. Glad to be here and looking forward to listening to everybody.
And Amy?
I am not Amy. I am Barb. Amy just got a call from a client and is taking it, but she will be right back. So Amy Anderson is the chair of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee, and she will be right back.
Thank you. If there are any other PCCEP members on this call, just please unmute yourself and introduce yourselves.
Some of our members will be coming in a little bit late, so.
Okay, so let's get started. So the purpose of this meeting is really a town hall discussion about the existing bodies that do police oversight in the city. And I could say, as someone who has been on PCCEP for a year, until a week ago, I was still very unclear about which bodies existed and what the work that they did was. So part of this is just about informing ourselves about what exists. We will also have time in the second part of the meeting to talk about what we could imagine as existing in the city, a more effective structure for police oversight. And as all of you probably know, Commissioner Hardesty is making a proposal to have a ballot initiative referred for November that would set up a structure for a new oversight body. So we're going to be hearing from Commissioner Hardesty. We're also going to be hearing from Professor Paul Snell from Pacific University, talking specifically about police commissions. But we really want to leave a lot of time in this, not to presenting, but really to hearing from the public about what your experiences are with police oversight bodies and about your ideas for how to make police oversight more effective. So with that, we're going to turn it over to the city auditor, Mary Hall Caballero, who's going to be speaking. She is going to be doing a presentation and she has 10 minutes. This is going to be a presentation sort of the whole IPR, and Dana and Ross are on board as well to answer questions. So Mary, you're up.
Can I interject one quick thing? When we're
Sure.
talking about the people that are speaking tonight and the committees they're on, if we could, some people don't know what IPR stands for.
Great point.
Thank you.
So the Independent Police Review is IPR, and the city auditor has started sharing her screen and she will explain more fully. Welcome, Mary.
Okay, I hope I can share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, you're good.
Right. So first of all, I wanted to thank you all for having us here today. We are wildly excited to get to have this conversation. And so the first thing I want to do is put us all into some context of a lot of people don't know what the city auditor is. And so I thought I'd start there and then walk through the elements of my office that have something or other to do with police oversight. You may not know, but there are 6 elected officials in the city of Portland, and the auditor is the 6th elected official. And my fellow elected colleagues have 2 responsibilities. They wear 2 hats. They're both legislators, and they also run the executive branch of the city. And my job as a city auditor is to keep an eye on them in their executive branch capacity. And I do not have a vote on council, and so my job is strictly to be kind of on the outside looking in. And the purpose of the auditor's office is to promote accountability and transparency. And I want to point out some things that Independent Police Review is a division in my office that provides some civilian oversight of police, but we also have audit services that does performance audits of the Police Bureau, and they look at how things are managed. And you may be familiar with the audit of the gang enforcement team. And also we recently did a police overtime audit, and that's examples of how you look at the way things are managed in the Bureau. The Ombudsman also can take complaints about the Police Bureau that aren't related to individual employee misconduct complaints, and that resides with the Independent Police Review. And I'm going to spend most of my presentation talking about Independent Police Review and its role in the oversight system, but we have a broader set of tools that we do provide some accountability for the Police Bureau. So Portland's police accountability system is a shared responsibility between the auditor and the mayor. I oversee Independent Police Review's 16 full-time employees, and 8 of those employees are investigators, and they take complaints about Portland police conduct. And they also have in their division a policy analysis unit that produces in-depth reports and does analyses on a variety of topics. We recently published a report on transit policing. That's an example of what came out of that unit. And the director of IPR is Ross Caldwell. Many of you may be familiar with him, and Deputy Director Dana Walton McCauley. They're both on the call tonight and are available to answer questions. The mayor, in his role as the police commissioner, oversees the Police Bureau, of course, and that includes the Professional Standards Division, which includes internal affairs. And internal affairs is the counterpart to Independent Police Review, and it also has 8 investigators who conduct investigations into police misconduct complaints. And the Citizen Review Committee is made up of 11 community volunteers who advise Independent Police Review and the Police Bureau on their operations. And it's my understanding that Candace Avalos is here tonight to talk a little bit more about the Citizen Review Committee. And so I'm not going to go into detail on that particular part, but she will handle that. So let's start with some fundamentals. The elements of an oversight system, there are many different types of models across the country, and they all have some of these basic elements. You need somebody to take the complaint, you need somebody to gather the evidence, you need somebody to review the case files when they're completed, and you need somebody to be the decision maker. And oversight systems, as I said, we participate in a professional association called NACOL, the National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And we go to an annual conference, and it is amazing how many different models exist across the country for police oversight. I also want to go through some elements of an investigation, just so everybody knows that all of these things need to be in place for a case to go through a system. So we need an allegation of misconduct. We have to be able to identify an officer who works for the Portland Police Bureau. We have to have applicable Police Bureau training and directives, and those are essentially our work rules. And then we need evidence. And the environment in which IPR or Independent Police Review works is bound by lots of legal requirements and constraints, and they are from state law, city code, and labor contracts. And misconduct investigations are essentially employment matters, and that's why it's a highly regulated environment. And the officers are governed by their training and directives, and those directives become the criteria by which their conduct will be judged. And they become very important components of an investigation. And if the directives are not aligned with the kind of policing that the community wants, then the community will never be happy with the outcomes of investigations based on those rules. And so what I thought I'd do next is walk us through what an average complaint would look like as it goes through the system. And the one I'm going to use is one that would result in serious discipline, which would be 1 day off of work without pay. And this will show you who does what. So let me orient you first and foremost to this table. So the left column has all the tasks that need to be accomplished. And the column to the right of that in green represents the tasks that were carried out by independent police review in my office. It takes complaints, it decides how they will be handled, it investigates some of them, and it recommends findings. It also monitors all cases investigated by internal affairs, and that role is denoted in the last row of the table. And the rest of the columns in blue reflect parties in the police bureau and their roles. So there's internal affairs, there's the police commander, the police review board, the police chief, and the police commissioner, who also is the mayor. And that far right column is the arbitrator. And I put that in this document because it's always a reminder that everything that we do must withstand the potential scrutiny of the arbitrator. And so the first thing I'd like you to do is to take a moment to consider the big picture just by looking at the dots on this graph. And you can note that the oversight, most of the oversight system resides within the police bureau. And the ultimate decision maker is the elected police commissioner. And every step leading to that decision made by Mayor Wheeler is presented in the form of a recommendation. And so there's ultimately one decision maker in the whole system. And most people don't appreciate the level of resources that are invested in investigating, reviewing, and deciding misconduct allegations. And you can see that part of the reason that we got into a situation in the settlement agreement with the Department of Justice is because it was taking us too long to get these cases done. And we have wildly improved our timeliness on those. But part of the reason is that we have a lot of steps and a lot of reviewing of prior steps in the process. And so if the police commissioner is the ultimate decision maker, I think that if you think about it a little bit, you'd be hard pressed to know how the police commissioner has come down on any individual case that he has decided. And I always ask people why that is. Why don't we know more about what the decisions that the police commissioner is making on a case-by-case basis? And I've identified two reasons from my perspective why our system suffers. And the first one is that it prioritizes secrecy. And the second one is that there are some structural barriers in place that independent police review should not have to deal with in doing its job as the entity outside of the police bureau that provides oversight. So let's talk a little bit about the system prioritizing secrecy.
Just Mary, we're almost at 10 minutes, so just try to.
Okay. So there's a lot of state laws that shield public disclosure information about police misconduct. That is made more problematic by the labor contract that says that discipline should be done in a manner least likely to embarrass an officer, and I always find that very difficult to assess what may or may not embarrass an officer. And I think that the public rightfully distrusts a system that it can't see. And then some of the barriers, I'm going to talk a little bit more in the next slide about some of the barriers that we have. But if these are the problems, we have some solutions that are within reach of us, making the system better. And they revolve around independence and transparency. And so there are changes that can be made to city code. There are changes that can be made to the labor contract. There are changes that can be made to state law. And also, because there is so much turnover in the police bureau, we have a hard time keeping our momentum when we're trying to knock down some of those structural barriers that would give independent police review more direct access to things. And I will put a handout in the chat, link to a document that will go over some of these in detail. And I presented it as a list of questions for the community to weigh and to decide how they want the system to be. What parts of the system they might want to keep if they want to change it. And there's also another document I'll put in there is the discipline guide, because a lot of people don't know that the decisions about discipline are, it was in the settlement agreement that we had to have a discipline guide so that there would be consistency across individual cases. I'll put both of those in the chat.
Thank you, Mary. And if you could also, there's been a request to put this PowerPoint in the chat. If you could share that as well, that'd be great.
Yes.
Also, Elliot, just to say that we're going to have the PowerPoint sent to Claudia, and we'll post it on our website as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you.
Can I just finish this one last slide?
Sure.
The reason we're here tonight is because there's a proposal being developed about changing the charter. And I wanted to stress that having done a charter change myself related to the city auditor's office, that I wanted to caution against rushing to get something done too quickly. I think that there's a lot of questions for the community to ponder and decide. And changing the charter is very permanent. It can only be amended by a number of people. And I think that there are some alternatives that exist that would create space and a timetable for thoughtful community discussions. I know I and the staff and IPR have been waiting a long time to have these discussions, and so we're very delighted that they're here. I think that there's also these interim steps that I talked about that would improve the existing system and also benefit a future oversight model. If the community decided that a different decision maker was what they want, because you still have to have the people who go out and, like I said, talk to the complainants and get the evidence. But it seems like the question now is, do you want a different decision maker? And there's a lot of expertise in the system, and I think that that should be retained. The taxpayers have already paid for that expertise. There's years of experience that is worth keeping in the new system.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you off just in the interest of leaving time for the public and for everyone else, but thank you for your comments and for your slides. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be awesome. So I don't know if I ever introduced myself. I'm Elliot Young. I'm the alternate co-chair on PCCEP and on the steering committee. There's one plug I want to make. We've lost a few members who've resigned recently. So if you're out there and you're interested in joining PCCEP, please apply. You can go to our website and find a way to apply. We are particularly interested in Black women applying to join PCCEP and other members of communities that are over-policed. So if you are one of those people, please consider PCCEP and apply. Okay, next up, we are going to turn to the Citizen Review Committee that the City Auditor referred to, and we have the chair of the Citizen Review Committee, Candace Avalos. So welcome, Candace.
Hey folks, so again, my name is Candace Avalos, she, her pronouns. I'm the chair of the Citizen Review Committee. We've got Vadim here, who is a member of PCCEP, but also is the vice chair of the Citizen Review Committee. And I will keep this super brief. I'll also include a link in the chat where folks can learn more and find ways to get plugged in with our work. The CRC, we are an 11-member board created in 2001 to help improve police accountability, promote higher standards of police services, and increase public confidence in law enforcement. And the volunteer members of the CRC have 4 primary functions. So that's gathering community concerns about police services. We held a forum last night, for example, about the protests to get community concerns. We also help the Independent Police Review or IPR director develop policy recommendations and address patterns and problems with police services and conduct. We review and advise IPR and IA, which is Internal Affairs, on the complaint handling process. And then we also hear appeals from the complainants and officers and publicly report on their findings. So the gist of what we do is hear those appeals, try to address policy reform changes, comment on directives, make recommendations, and then help the city and IPR to gather community feedback. So that's the gist of it. I know we're crunched for time and I do want to leave time for the public. I just wanted to turn it over real quick to Vadim, who's going to explain what the PRB is, and then I'll post in the chat a link for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace. So my name is Vadim Mazursky again. As a member on the CRC, individuals can also volunteer to participate in the police review board. And I think that is actually one of the more important things that the CRC does. The police review board, whenever it reviews cases involving such things as officer-involved shootings, physical injury causing hospitalization, in custody deaths, and whenever there's an out-of-policy recommendation on less lethal use of force, the police review board hears these cases, and individuals can review the case file, which is an investigatory file, including any videos, recordings, basically the whole file involving that particular incident, and then become part of a hearing in which that incident is discussed. And so Internal Affairs provides information about that. There's training officers that provide information, and a panel of 7 members, including 2 community members, some police members, and then also the IPR director participate. And there's a discussion about whether the officer acted in policy or out of policy. And based on those discussions, there can be a recommendation that's made to either the police chief or the police commissioner, depending on the level of the incident, as to whether disciplinary action needs to take place. Once again, this is a very thorough investigation that you're a part of, and you get to see the whole file. You actually have to go right now to the police bureau in order to review it. Whenever there's a use of deadly force, one of the CRC members is asked to participate in that review and vote on whether an officer acted in policy or out of policy, and make recommendations on whether there needs to be a debriefing or disciplinary measures would need to be taken. Thank you.
Thanks, Vadim. And if those of you who don't know, check out the Oregonian yesterday. Candace Avalos has an awesome op-ed which talks about her experience on the CRC and the theater, she calls the theater of oversight. So we can get to that in the discussion. So next up, we thought, even though the Training Advisory Council is not directly doing oversight, we thought it was an important piece of the puzzle of people involved in looking at the Police Bureau and providing citizen input. So we have Sean from the Training Advisory Council. Sean, are you there? There you are.
Yeah, I'm here. My name is Sean Campbell. I'm the chair of the Training Advisory Council, which is the often forgotten group of groups that advise the police. We were created in 2012 by a city council resolution. We have a 24-member board that is basically recruited by ourselves. We are technically independent of the Police Bureau, though we do work closely with them, trying to create recommendations and reports regarding training, directives, and policy. We also have a requirement by the settlement agreement where we have to, on a quarterly basis, look at police use of force and report back any concerns that we have in that area to the Police Bureau. Let's see, kind of the overall, we're a group, we're a little different than a lot of the other groups, mostly because, for instance, the PCCEP has a lot more public input, why we depend a lot more upon the expertise of the people we recruit. We try to recruit people from a wide degree of life experiences, and especially communities that have a lot of experience dealing with the police or have a lot of police interactions, though that can be challenging at times due to trust issues. We as well tend to recruit from a wide range of industries, people who either have experience in HR or training, or even healthcare, psychology, analysis, all those kind of areas.
Thank you, Sean. That was very helpful for me, at least.
Here, and I'll post our website here in the chat if anyone wants to look at it.
Great. Thanks, Sean. We thought we'd be remiss if we didn't explain a little bit about what PCCEP does in terms of this oversight / communication with the Police Bureau function. So Lakiana is going to explain briefly what PCCEP does.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Elliot. Yeah, so the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing is born out of the settlement agreement between the City of Portland and the Portland Police Bureau, stemming from a 2013 agreement that was found that the Portland Police Bureau used excessive force against persons with actual or perceived mental health issues. And we're the second iteration of the advisory body that was put in that agreement. The first one was the Community Oversight Advisory Board. And that one was disbanded in 2016, shortly after Mayor Wheeler was elected. And then PCCEP was created in its place, a 13-member body, 11 full adult seats, and then 2 youth seats. We currently have 4 subcommittees: the Racial Equity Subcommittee, Youth Subcommittee, a Behavioral Health Subcommittee, and a Policy and Settlement Agreement. Our main charge is to oversee the settlement agreement, which is now in its final stage. Last February, or this past February, a judge found the city and the police bureau in substantial compliance with the settlement agreement. There's a number of challenges with that, but in addition to that, our committee is kind of in this space where we're trying to frame what else we are supposed to do in existing beyond that settlement agreement. And so that to that end, we're working on being codified into city code to exist permanently outside of just that settlement agreement. And we had just posted on our website some recommendations we made to the mayor as far as what changes we would like to see once we're a body instituted in city code. Right now, our members are selected by the mayor. The original 13 group was selected after applying, and then when new seats open, like the ones we currently have, PCCEP members make recommendations, and then the mayor takes those recommendations. Each member that we have recommended the mayor so far, he has taken, so we appreciate that. And there's some other challenges. You know, we're a volunteer body, and it's a really large scope of work. And so what we're just trying to work on internally amongst our team is figure out how can we best utilize our time and energy to be the most good, to be that bridge between the community and the police bureau, make recommendations while also staying within the scope of what's reasonably possible for a volunteer group. I will say though, last month we had over 9 meetings, engaged over 700 individuals between these meetings, and I would say each member probably spent upwards of at least 20 hours working on stuff. So I think we need to dial that back. We have a really passionate group, but just the scope of our work is very big. So I think looking at how can we use the other bodies, or what changes or reforms or practices can we make to make that process easier, link those bodies, and help make real change here in Portland.
Thanks a lot, Anna. Just one note, I think Judge Simon said that he wants to give the process another year before determining substantial compliance. So we're still sort of under the DOJ's watch, I think, for another year or so.
That's for PCCEP, but for
Right.
the agreement itself is on a countdown clock for, I believe, January, February.
Right, so PCCEP as part of the agreement is still to be checked off. Thank you. So Assistant Chief Mike Krantz, I believe, is on the line, and wanted to see whether he had any comments about the existing, I see he's on the line, about the existing accountability oversight system, what works and what doesn't work from his perspective. So Mike, are you there?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to be real fast because I know you're pressed for time, and much of what I said has been echoed by the auditor, or what I would say would be echoed by the auditor as far as the system itself. I think 2 of the main strengths that I think we see as a police bureau is that there's significant community involvement throughout the process from beginning to end, as well as there is an independent oversight role. The independence is key. Those 2, community involvement and independence, make a accountability system thorough, right? This is an internal insulated system within the police bureau. It's external, it's independent, and it has its own ability to investigate and provide investigations because of that involvement. A couple of the processes that I think work well are that there's a sameness between the PPB's internal affairs process and IPR. That has taken a long time to get to really a process where a member who is being involved in an investigation can expect similar process, where it's not something completely different. The IPR has full administrative investigations of all force complaints, and That's an important piece. Obviously, that's part of the DOJ settlement agreement, but unless they determine that it's clear and convincing evidence that the complaint has no basis of fact, things are investigated thoroughly. The implementation and consistent use of a discipline guide is key to the fairness of an accountability system, which will be required under the new RS as well, which is an accountability or agreement on a discipline matrix. And I think some of the still ongoing opportunities for improvement, I think, is timeliness. I believe the sheer volume of allegations that come into IPR does take up a lot of their valuable resource, and many of those are unfounded. They have obviously have data that you can see for yourself on their website, but the timeliness for an ongoing investigation can always be improved. I think the investigation itself, there is some employee or human factor that still has to be considered, even though there's a lot of demand for the police accountability side of it. Police officers and employees are still humans and employees, and it's still a traumatic experience, even if you know that you did absolutely nothing wrong and did the right thing, to go through an investigation and have it drag on for 6 months, just waiting for the outcome. I think that's been a Achilles heel for a long time, and that continues to be. And I think part of it is because the city doesn't have unlimited funds to hire personnel. If we could hire dozens of investigators, then we could get through things quickly and be done, but there's still timeliness. You know, I guess the biggest point I'd would like to consider is that even if you change the group, you change the name, you make it different, if you have community involvement, independence, that's still going to be the outcome should be based on law, labor law, and due process, rules of evidence. So once people are trained, once people are able to do the investigations as they should through the actual law and rules that are in place, the outcome should generally be the same investigations. So the changing of a system to change outcomes would be, I would take caution in that. And I guess that's all I can say to that, is that the outcomes generally should be the same if you have people that are trained to do the same work.
Okay.
Final thought is, it's not a perfect system. Every person who's involved with it has seen it grow, has seen it changed, but it's well on the way to continue to build on the strong foundation it already has. It's taken years to get to this point, and it will continue to improve as we go through.
Thank you, Mike, for that perspective. I see in the chat, Mary Blalock asked how PCCEP could be independent if the mayor recruits and approves members of the PCCEP. So it's not actually the mayor who's at this point doing the recruiting. It really is PCCEP and the general community that should be recruiting for PCCEP. There's a board of people made up of the Albina Ministerial Alliance, Mental Health Alliance, as well as PCCEP members who does the interviewing. PCCEP then votes on those members, and then the mayor has accepted our recommendations up till now. We do serve at the mayor's pleasure. Up till now, none of us have been fired, so that's a good sign. But it is written in that we serve at the mayor's pleasure. So I just wanted to respond to that. So now it's time for the public to comment. If you have any experiences with this system, if you want to comment on what you think of the current system, whether it works or doesn't work, now is your time. And I encourage you to use the raise hand function in the participants box. So I don't see any right now, but if you can't get to that, if you just put it in the chat function, we'll also find you that way. Any questions about how the current system works? Comments about how it works? Dana Buell asks, have any PCCEP members quit? We've had a number of members who have resigned over the time that PCCEP has existed. So I'm not sure if that's quitting, but they resigned for various reasons.
Yeah, I can add to that just that, most of them are changes in lifestyle. We had 3 resignations this month, and 2 of them were, all 3 of them, I think, were the individuals moved out of the area. One resigned because he was just too busy. But, and we've had some that have resigned also because they went to college. So there's a variety of reasons. It's generally, though, just that's hard to serve on a volunteer body, and then, life happens. So it's part of the game.
Thanks, Akiana. So we have a couple of people, Portland Cop Watch up first, and then after that, Reverend Matt Hennessey. So Portland Cop Watch, see you, Dan.
Hi, yeah, this is Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I appreciate that you're holding this forum. It does seem like a very short amount of time to try to explain an incredibly complicated system. Some of the things I think that some of the people who are kind of new to all this might need to know is that independent police review, we often put independent in quotation marks because when they do investigations, and they only investigate 1 out of every 5 cases that gets investigated, and that is less than 50% of the complaints that come in. But when they do investigations, in order to ask the officers to give them testimony, they have to have internal affairs from the police bureau order the officer to answer the questions for them, because they do not have the power to compel officer testimony. They are also, by the Police Association contract, prohibited from investigating deadly force incidents, which is, I think, one of the things that's the most high on people's minds of when they think of police accountability. What they want independent investigators to do is look into those very important and lethal cases. But IPR is not allowed to do that. And that has been interpreted to mean that the Citizen Review Committee that Ms. Avalos chairs is not allowed to have people appeal when the Bureau finds there was no wrongdoing in a shooting case. So the father of Keaton Otis, who was killed by Portland police, struck by 23 bullets in 2010, tried appealing the outcome of that case where it was found there was no misconduct, and he was told he was not allowed to do that given the way the system is set up. So there are a lot of more pieces of this system that really could be worthwhile having a thorough discussion about. But again, I appreciate you holding this forum.
Thanks, Dan. Next up, Reverend Matt Hennessey.
Yes, I first of all want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for the great work that PCCEP is doing and has been doing. Thank you for the great work the Auditor's Office with CRC, IPR, and TAC are doing as well. It seems that I really want to make a comment because I agree with the last speaker that these are complicated issues that we're talking about. They take a lot of time, and I have had the opportunity to work and listen through the IPR process, the CRC process quite a bit in the last last 4 years. There is some tweaking, I believe, that needs to be done, particularly in the area of how long it takes from the time IPR or CRC gets a complaint or a concern to the time it's actually finished. And I think that certainly requires some work. Other than that, when I think about what you do at PCCEP, when I think about what happens at IPR, there's an awful lot of work. And I thank you for the great work that you're doing. And I will reserve any other comments till later. And then I have no idea how to potentially get other comments made, but I will try to reach out to you and find out. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Hennessey, for those comments. We don't currently have anyone on the queue, but I see that Mary Hel Caballero has responded about the IPRs. Mary, do you want to speak to, I guess, Dan's question about about compelling officer testimony?
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify something. There was a time where there was a strange interpretation when IPR would go in to do an interview with an officer where they would have to ask, give their questions to internal affairs, and internal affairs would ask the question. That hasn't been the case. I've been in my office for 6 years. It hasn't been the case since I've been there. The reason that internal affairs is in the interview is because code requires them to be there, and that's one of the code changes we would recommend to get that out of there. The second thing is they read an admonishment from the chief that is a legal requirement that an officer be told they must participate in the interview and they must participate truthfully. And then they turn it over to the IPR investigator and they carry out the interview from there. And we think that there's changes that can be made to both of those things so that internal affairs would not sit in the
Thank you for that clarification, Mary. So I'm going to leave it for a few seconds to see if there are no more public comments, but if they're not, we could move ahead to the second part, which is probably why everyone is really here, to talk about the proposals for the new, some new system that Commissioner Hardesty has proposed. So seeing no more public comments, there'll be another time for the public to comment later on. I'm going to turn it over to Lakiana, who's going to facilitate the second part. Lakiana.
Yeah, there is some questions in the comments, and I would just invite those individuals, if you just want to bring your question up. I know Judith was just saying it's hard to track all of them. So if you have a comment, why don't we just have you either just unmute and speak or raise your hand so we can.
Yeah, someone said Lindsay had a comment. So Lindsay, would you want to?
Megan on there as well.
Oh, Megan, yes. So Megan, I see your hand. Why don't you speak?
Yeah, I just, a concern I've had, and I see it elsewhere in the chat too, is I've had it for a while, is there a way that PCCEP and maybe some of the other advisory bodies can have more teeth in their recommendations, that they're actually, you know, that the city is really compelled to follow through on what's coming through in PCCEP, and so that's a big question I have.
I can take a stab at that. So if someone can, maybe Judith or Claudia can post, we made about 9 recommendations to the mayor for when they codify PCCEP, and one of them was more concrete language around what PPBs, Portland Police Bureau's responsibility is to take those considerations into place and actually implement them, and being more clear about that. So yes, that's absolutely something that we want. Some of the other recommendations include PCCEP choosing its own members. I saw some questions about stipends. We are currently paid $120 for each month, and I would increase that to $500. So I currently, when we make a recommendation to the Portland Police Bureau, depending on what they have, I believe 60 days to get back to us. They're either approving it or are disproving it, and it depends on the type of recommendation that it is. Sometimes we make comments to their community engagement plan, and so they can take those recommendations right away. We recently made a recommendation that we called a procedural justice recommendation in January, and that would require the Portland Police Bureau's universal review process to be put in place, because it's an actual policy that would change what they're doing. And Chief Resch at the time approved it, but then there really hasn't been any follow-up, well, what happens next? So she approved it tentatively and said it would then have to be worked out with the Bureau, what actually happens with it. And that gets into a really gray area, okay, and that goes back to also what I was saying earlier about the work that PCCEP does. We have passed policy recommendations. I'm not sure that is the best use of our time. We're not policy writers. We're not legislators in that sense. And so I think that we should be able to give more general recommendations and things that the community are saying, and then let people who are paid to do this work actually go through it. There's even suggestions, should PCCEP do audits of the monetary impact of these? No, absolutely not. We don't have the money, staff, or time. There's paid people within the city, within the Bureau, that could work out the financial feasibility. So that's it. Going back to just your original question, it's a gray area. What exactly happens when we get codified? We want clear language. We want our recommendations to actually be considered and have some kind of process, because that's our only real ability is what does the Bureau actually have to consider and do with what we say? And that goes to some of the strengths and weaknesses of PCCEP and our ability as a volunteer body. And I think as we move forward with police oversight, that we are then partnered or linked more closely with groups that are paid, such as the IPR, which can push other things that we would like to see that a volunteer body just doesn't have the bandwidth to do.
Yeah, I see Alan Kessler has his hand up, but before that, I just wanted to respond to Lindsay's question. Does investing time, money, and energy in PCCEP distract from taking actual steps towards abolishing PPB? So this is an abolitionist question. I think that one could make the argument that if PCCEP is working to reform and make the PPB less offensive, less police brutality, that that would be undermining maybe the efforts to abolish PPV. Although the way that I personally see it is that we are trying to improve community safety, and we're trying to do that. So even if you're an abolitionist and believe that ultimately the Portland Police Bureau should be abolished, I think getting involved in the meantime in trying to address some of the egregious behaviors of the Bureau is worth the time and effort. And I think those of us who are mostly volunteering our time, believe that. Alan, you're up. Kessler.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about the incentives and the mechanisms here. I mean, this feels a lot like on the criminal prosecution side, the DA gets an office in the courthouse and the defenders are always shortchanged, and that leads to imbalances. Here, we have volunteers who are subject to gag orders, so they don't get to have any of the sort of moral outrage. The best they can do is a sort of, the article we just saw where somebody said, yeah, if you could release what's going on, you'd be horrified. But they don't get to have that pulpit to affect things that way. They're not paid, so they don't have the sort of stability that comes with money and the sort of incentive and the capacity to bring in people to put all of their effort into it and not have to worry about, the basics of life. And then they don't have any power of enforcement. So it feels like the PPA is a really well-funded machine that has all of that. They're able to they have a dead possum budget. They're able to speak to the media. They're able to fund lots of staff positions, and they can fight against you. And you've been strung in every way that I can think to string an organization. You need money, you need power of enforcement, and you need the gag order removed. And without that, there's no oversight.
What do you mean by gag order?
Tell me, so who did you investigate last week and what did they do?
Oh, we're not in charge of investigations. That would be the CRC or the IPR.
And honestly, I lose myself in all of these. So I'm talking generally about a body that would be effective, but the people who can see the secret files, I bet can't tell me what's in them. And that needs to change.
Maybe Ross, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I'd like to take a shot at answering that. And I think talking about all these different oversight bodies at once with all the acronyms is very confusing. We actually at IPR, we are paid for city staff.
Can you introduce who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. Ross Caldwell, director of IPR. We are city staff at IPR. We have 15 employees. We have currently 7 investigators, but we're funded for 8 investigators. But I think you're absolutely right about you called it a gag order. We are not able to make public our investigations. And that's something that Dana, the deputy director, and I, and Mary, our boss, who you heard from before, that's something we've identified as a huge problem and something that we desperately, desperately want to change. I think that when somebody makes a complaint with us and they don't get to see their file, or the community doesn't get to see the file, they don't get to see all the work we did, they don't get to see who we asked questions of, what those questions were, if we asked appropriate questions, if we asked squishy leading questions, they don't get to see any of that. They don't get to see it from internal affairs or from IPR. And that's a huge problem because it doesn't allow you to see where some of the problems actually lie. The most common reason for us to close a case is because even if if we can prove everything that the complainant said about what a police officer did, it still doesn't violate a Portland Police Bureau directive, which means that we don't really have anything to investigate. But what that really means is that we need to take a look at those directives, and we need to see if those directives are written in a way that we like of and that the community approves of. And so we're missing that part of the feedback loop where these investigations are public and the community can see, okay, we looked into that. You know, there wasn't a disciplinary matter, but we do need to look into these directives. And that's a huge part of this process that is missing and that needs to be improved. And we've got kind of a roadmap for the things that need to be changed. And it would require amending the union contract or negotiating it differently going forward, and changing a couple of state statutes and a couple things in city code. So we can do it, and we've identified a way to do it. It's going to take some work though.
Thanks. I would also add that PCCEP, one of our charges is looking at those directives, but it would be important to have that information from the Independent Police Review Board. So we have 2 more hands, and then I'm going to cut it off because we want to get on to the second part. So quickly, if you can, Sean from TAC, the Training Advisory Council.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that many of our issues are similar to PCCEP, where we can send recommendations to the chief, but if the chief just rejects it or someone within the Bureau rejects it, we have no way of trying to move it further from there if we feel strongly about it, which is obviously an issue. And then the other issue we have is we basically have 0 staff, and we're all volunteers. So everything we do, every time we come out with a policy recommendation, all that work is done by volunteers. And with some people, I mean, we're talking 10+ hours a week. So, and then on top of that, because you have turnover over time, we have a long-term drain of knowledge just because of turnover. So these are all issues that really affect how effective we are. And I believe any one of these independent citizens groups are at doing their work.
I hear you. Ethan Connolly, last word on this portion.
Can I just also make a suggestion from the comments that when we're talking, we just use our full body names instead of the acronyms because they're confusing people.
Ethan.
Yeah, Ethan Connolly here. My question was in particular to any of the city council members that are here as well. It seems like even with the U.S. Department of Justice, you know, suing Portland and saying that to resolve that, the major issue is that we still don't have enough citizen oversight, and that's going to ongo until we do get that citizen oversight. And so many people using terms like, you know, this organization doesn't have enough teeth. You know, publicly, that's kind of the thought, is that this organization needs to be able to actually have officers provide testimony for violent acts, and anytime there's a shooting, use of force, things like that. My question, I guess, is it the police union and the contract itself that's preventing something that the city wants and the US DOJ wants? And if so, what do we need to do as citizens to make that change? I know that those contract negotiations are often in secret and are private, and a lot of things happen behind closed doors. But is it a new mayor? Is it a new lawyer or someone that can help with this process to make sure that the DOJ and the citizens of Portland actually get to achieve what we would like, which is, you know, citizen oversight, where the police bureau is actually oversought by the citizens.
Thanks, Ethan. So this is a perfect segue into the next section. I would just say that I think it's all of the above. Some of this has to do with state legislation. A lot of it has to do with the contract. Some of it has to do with the structures. But if we don't have people on the city council or elected leaders, and especially the mayor who's police commissioner, who believes in these things and wants to push them forward, then nothing will happen. So I think that's a key element to this. In terms of the DOJ settlement agreement, if you look through that very lengthy agreement, you'll see that there are a lot of boxes that are about holding meetings, engaging the community. Absolutely none of it is about outcomes. So they could be in substantial compliance by having meetings, engaging the public, and we could not change anything, and that would satisfy satisfy the DOJ. That's one of the critiques that I personally have of the settlement agreement, but it's what we're stuck with in terms of the settlement agreement. So I think we need to move beyond the vision of the settlement agreement onto the kind of changes that I think Commissioner Hardesty is imagining, or some of you in the public are imagining complete abolition, which we could talk about as well. But let me turn it over to Lakiana. Thank you for this first part and sticking to the to what exists. Now let's imagine what can come next.
Thank you, Elliot. Appreciate that. Yeah, I would just add to it that the Citizen Review Committee, the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, the Training Advisory Council, and Independent Police Review have been meeting, talking, and discussing, and we all agree that changes need to be made to the current system, streamline it, and things of that nature. So the second part of this meeting is going to be a discussion from a number of individuals who have plans to make changes, and then we'll also open it up to public comment to hear your suggestions on what you would like to see. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Hardesty to start us off. She has a ballot initiative to overhaul the current Oversight Committee. She has 10 minutes. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here today, for engaging our members, not only just tonight, but throughout our process, and being a big supporter of our committee, which we really appreciate. Go ahead. We'd love to hear what you...
You are very welcome, and thank you so much for the invitation tonight. Let me first say that I think the auditor's office is second to none when it comes to auditing city government and finding out what's working and what isn't working. I say that because you can go to the auditor's office. Well, now you have to go online. But if you look at all the audits around police activity that have taken place over the last few years, there's a lack of overtime accountability. Officers work overtime when they don't need to work overtime. We've spent just tens of millions of dollars on overtime. Training, you know, there's a reason why there are so many committees with no teeth. It was created that way. And it was created that way when I was part of the community group that brought the DOJ to town, because we knew that Portland police would not, in fact, investigate themselves and find themselves guilty of any wrongdoing. 30 years of police reform, I can tell you that we have spent lots and lots of time tinkering around the edges. When IPR was envisioned as a temporary stopgap until we could figure out how to move forward. I actually happened to be on a committee that Mayor Vera Katz put together that did not come out with the recommendation about IPR. It actually came out with a recommendation about a truly independent police oversight board that would have subpoena power, that would have the ability to compel officer testimony, and that the discipline that was recommended would have to be accepted by the chief and the police commissioner. And honestly, that has been a top recommendation of every community effort that has been undertaken over the last 30 years. So why do I not want to just tinker around the edges of IPR? IPR does not have the trust of the community. When IPR first started, and for years after, they would toss away over 50% of the complaints that came in. They lost any kind of credibility that they could have built with the community a decade ago. The police actually don't trust IPR, and IPR does not have the ability to directly question officers as it relates to police accountability. As someone who's been working on police accountability again for over 30 years, I can tell you that every system that currently is supposed to hold police accountable are dysfunctional. None of them work, or maybe I should say they all work as intended. And I would actually say PCCEP is probably an exception to that, because you are the first advisory committee that I have seen that has very publicly and aggressively pushed back on demands that you have been making, right? Most of these other committees were put together in response to the DOJ, and they were put together by one police chief, that you had to pass that police chief muster in order to be on that committee. To me, that's not oversight. That's not accountability. That's not ensuring that every community's voice is valued. And so the measure that I am moving forward is really a simple measure. It would totally remove police oversight from both the city of Portland and from the police bureau. There would be a community commission that would actually have subpoena power, have the authority to interview officers, to investigate. They would have a budget that would allow them to do that. And the community recommendations would be binding, and they would have to actually be implemented. Now, when the auditor says that we are rushing to this, 30 years of data and task force and blue ribbon task force will tell you that that's simply not true. What we are rushing to do is to take advantage of the moment where people are experiencing police violence in ways that many white people have never experienced. You can talk to any folks who've been working on police accountability for a decade or more, and none of these ideas are new. I wish I could say that this was a brilliant brainstorm that I had, and it's so innovative, nobody's thought about it before. It is simply not true. But after 30 years of advocating for police reform, here's what I know. I have worked with 9 police commissioners. I have worked with 17 police chiefs over my 30 years. And I can tell you that the culture of Portland Police Bureau has not changed one iota in that time. And so this is really about the community deciding, what does community safety look like? We have spent a lot of time having the police tell us who's committing the crime, who the criminals are, how many resources they need to fight crime. And guess what? Their solve rate is really, really, really bad. And so as they've expanded their expertise into now being housing experts and mental health experts and many of the other things that they have taken on over the years, honestly, they are doing way too much. It is not the role of police to fix social issues. And the police have done a wonderful job of creating a public narrative about how we're not safe if we don't have a whole bunch of armed people walking up and down our streets. What this protest movement, I hopefully believe is telling us is that there are many communities that don't feel safe with police at all. That's why the Portland Street Response has received such strong support from the business community, from the houseless community, and from a whole host of folks who you would never think of as radical people as it relates to police. And so the people who've been working within the system, of course, think we can just tinker around the edges and it will be a wonderful thing. I can tell you after 30 years, tinkering is not what we need to do. We need to absolutely blow up the system that we have and create one that is responsive to the community, what the community wants from their police force, and how the community wants to hold their police force accountable. Do we have to make changes to the state arbitration bill? Absolutely. And it is my hope we will make the changes necessary in the next special session in August. We're already talking about what those changes look like, what will be necessary. And so I am very excited that I am not waiting to do one thing before I do the other, and then before I do the other. We have an opportunity now to fundamentally reimagine what community safety looks like. And in my mind, police should do what police are supposed to do. They are supposed to solve crime and prevent crime. And if we narrow the focus of police to that very narrow area, which is where their expertise lies, and then change who we recruit and how we recruit and who trains the people that we recruit, we will end up with the kind of police force that actually sees themselves as partners in the community rather than occupying forces that think they can mandate behavior. And so I will stop there. I could talk for the next half hour, but I'm really interested in people's questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for that. We are going to hear from 2 more individuals, and then we'll open it up to public comment. Definitely seeing the comments in the chat. I'm not monitoring that, so if you would love to ask your question, once we get to that, please share it there, because those are not being monitored. I want to invite Robert King from the mayor's office. If you have any comment on tonight's discussion, the mayor's position on police oversight or anything of that nature.
Yeah, Lakiana, thanks very much. Nicole was going to be here tonight. She was unable to attend. She's been in conversations in our office with the mayor and with Derek Bradley and Commissioner Hardesty's office around the ballot measure and some of the conversations surrounding what, as the commissioner just mentioned, the re-envisioning could look like. So the mayor has produced back on June the 9th his 20-point plan for reforms, and those we're moving forward on. And so I'm here tonight mostly to listen, take information in. Very grateful for the group convening and the conversations happening and progressing in the way that they are. I feel like there's a great energy and momentum at this time that we need to seize upon. I know, just saw by email that CRC has invited Chief Lavelle to a meeting, a similar conversation on Monday from 5 until 7. So like the commissioner, I'm really interested in hearing the community voice, really hearing from people and trying to understand what it is about the current system that is concerning. And as we talk about what could the future of accountability could look like, hearing some of the ideas from the people who've been a part of it and people in the community who would like more responsiveness. So I'm going to be taking very detailed notes, talking with Nicole in our office and the mayor himself. And then I know we'll be working closely with Commissioner Hardesty and her staff and other people, other elected officials and their teams, along with all of you, both on PCCEP, CRC, the TAC, and then all community members who've come into the conversation, been a part of the conversation for a long time, and figure out what we can do better together kind of moving forward.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to remind people to be respectful. We don't have to agree, but there are rules that we gave in the beginning and ask that you respect all speakers, regardless if you agree with their point or not, and you will be removed if you don't. I'm going to turn it over next to Professor Paul Snell, who's going to has 5 minutes to talk about police commissions, another idea that has been floated as a possible opportunity for police oversight reform. Professor?
Good evening. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be talking to all of you and speak after Commissioner Hardesty, who's been fighting for justice in Portland for decades. So it's a real honor to be in your presence and to be able to follow you. So before I talk a bit more about my proposal for a police commission, I'd like to give a little bit of background about myself. I got my PhD in political science from Minnesota, and I lived in Minneapolis for 6 years. I moved in 2017, and I was supposed to go back for Memorial Day this year, but COVID changed those plans. And so the loss of George Floyd was a loss for sure, but my community was one that burned during these riots. That was my target, that was my AutoZone. So this is personal for me. Not only that, I am also the child of LAPD employees for 30 years. I remember the Rodney King riots. My mom was a 911 dispatcher, and my dad mostly worked on the administrative side. So he was in charge of proposing the changes to LAPD that needed to be made over a long period of time. And what both my parents saw, dealing with the Little Boys Network and the racism, was that LAPD had the right pressures, not quickly, but over 30 years. And that's what I really want to talk about. And one of those pressures that's missing in Portland is stronger police and civilian governance. That's what's missing. So if you can imagine the Portland Police Bureau being like in the center of a lot of pressures, right? We have bottom pressure from you and me, all of us community members. We're the grassroots. We're pushing for pressure, but we don't have the ability to put any changes into effect. Same thing is true for the alphabet soup of organizations out there, right? I've been looking at the comments while I've been trying to figure out how chat works. And all of you have said, what is IPR? What's CRC, PRB? They all have provided civilian input, but what we're really missing is that pressure from the top. And it's really not anyone's fault in particular. The main source of pressure at the top is the mayor, right? The mayor is the police commissioner, And he has the direct line, he or she has the direct line to the chief. And the problem with the system is that the mayor has to do other things. The mayor needs to focus on a variety of other issues like homelessness and transportation. And so what I'm proposing is something a little different. It's proposing not one commissioner, but 9, and actually giving us not civilian oversight, but civilian control and civilian governance of the police department. It's a fundamental and much more comprehensive change. If you think about it, we see it in other areas of life. If you look at universities and colleges, they have boards of trustees. If you look at school districts, they have school boards. And a lot of police departments have police commissions. LA is an example that I know most well, but also Honolulu has a police commission. Milwaukee does as well. And Oakland recently put one in place in 2017 because they needed to put through these community reforms. They needed that consistent pressure. I think there are 4 main advantages that comes from a police commission that you don't get with any other proposal. And you can remember them by A, B, C, D. Administration, budgets, chiefs, and discipline. From the administrative side, because they run the department, they're the board of directors, they set every policy. And I mean from the most mundane to the most meaningful. On the mundane side, I'll give you an example. For example, LAPD has to accept every donation to the department, including horses for the street police. That ranges all the way up to whether the chief can go to a conference or not, because the chief's not allowed to leave the city without the police commission's approval. That goes all the way up to use of force policies and includes things like they're proposing right now. LAPD's police commission is working on a proposal to force officers who are bystanders to incidents. They now have to report that to their supervisors. That's coming directly from the board of directors, trickling down to the chief and everyone else. So that's administrative, that's the A. B are budgets, right? They're the board of trustees. They determine which get funded and what doesn't. And right now, LAPD is proposing $100 to $150 million in cuts to their department. But that's up to them. The board of directors of the board of police commissioners is working with the city of LA to do. The third element, this is the one that's really missing, are chiefs. Police commissions hire and fire the chief. They get to determine whether or not those chiefs are in alignment with the goals of the board. And if they're not, they can choose to fire them or not. It also is reinforced in really subtle ways. For example, police chiefs report to the board of police commissioners. In Honolulu, they meet, I think, twice a month. In LAPD, they meet once a week, every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. The chief of police has to report on every single use of force to the police commission and all of their changes. So that's the first step. Then the last one is discipline, the D part. So obviously they have the subpoena powers that the other organizations lack because they're part of the department. So I don't want to say anything inaccurate, but it's likely that if something like the IPR was put, or the Independent Police Review was put under a police commission, they would be able to do that. And that's what you see in other cities. So for example, in LA, the Inspector General runs parallel investigations alongside internal affairs. So when I get to the police commission, the police chief, they can say, well, internal affairs said this, but our independent auditors who have some subpoena power said this, because they're part of the department and they supervise and set policy. So once again, like I said, you have administration, the A, budgets, chiefs, and discipline. What I'm proposing is I'll put it in chat, an executive summary. It's 3 pages, not too long, that creates a full-time commission. This is something we see in other places. They don't have enough time to do their job and to administer. So 9 full-time commissioners who have broad power to set policy for the department. They are forced to be strategic. I require the chief to issue a State of the Union report on the department, and I require the board of trustees to offer a 5-year plan of their goals for the city. And I also require limit cronyism. So most other cities, you have the mayor appointing people, not in this setup. What I have are community organizations nominating members to be then put on a short list by the city council, and then the mayor can choose. And that rotates every year. What we need is more fundamental than civilian oversight. We need stronger civilian governance. Because we know if you change the rules, you change the game. And that's what I'm proposing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Professor Snow. Appreciate you being timely with that. We're also knocking out a lot of key information. We're gonna now open it up to public comment. If you could use the raise your hand feature. I also just wanna let our elected officials know, I'm gonna save some time at the end for both of you to give some final comments. And then we just ask that you just answer at this point questions that are either directed to you, but know that you will have some time at the end to give any kind of final feedback. So if you all want to use the raise your hand feature, if you're on the phone, you can just say, I have a question, and we will get them there. I see a ton of stuff being asked in the chat, so let's get some hands raised and we'll go from there.
If I may jump in real quick, I see in the question some of you are referring to Eugene, Oregon. So Eugene, Oregon has what's called police commission, and so does Seattle. But the difference is that they are more similar to our civilian oversight boards in that they have semi-limited, mostly investigative power. But other police commissions, like the ones I've been talking about in other cities like LA, Oakland, San Francisco, they have more policymaking power. They're more governance bodies. So if you see the word police commission, they don't always have the same powers that, for example, LA or Oakland does. Thank you.
So, Paul, let me ask you, since I don't see anyone else on the list, if someone were to say, like, I see what's going on in LA and San Francisco and I don't really like it, so why should we follow this police commission model? How is your model going to be better than the outcomes that we see in LA and San Francisco?
So a few different things. So there are two answers to that. The first one is, like I've been saying, to me, I've always thought police commissions like yeast in a recipe of dough, right? It helps things happen. And that's why I saw, like I said, with my parents for over 30 years, LAPD's been through a lot, but they had the right pressure. And I think a good example of that is their use of force policy. So for example, LAPD is proposing changing the way they operate because California has forced the police departments to. And the reason why you see that change is because the state forced them to make that change. LAPD and their police commission has been working on those changes. And recently, as of, I believe it was February 4th of this year, you can check on the department's website, they have taken committee input for changing their policy and they revised it. So yes, police commissions are not perfect, but it's that right governance link to create that holistic pressure around police departments from the bottom, from us, from independent boards, but especially from the top down. So that's the first answer. The second answer to your question is, yes, police departments and especially these boards of directors are always responsive. They're always a little late to the game, right? But that's why my proposal forces them to be strategic. That's why I force them to come up with a 5-year plan and force the chief to help them do that. So that they can, because they're gonna get overwhelmed by running the department and setting donation policies. That's why I force them to be strategic as part of their mandate. So that should help alleviate some of the problems and helps them think ahead rather than responding to the last crisis. But of course, it's not perfect.
Thank you for that question, Elliot. Dana, I see you just dropped a question in the comments. Do you want to ask that to the group? Okay, Alan's got a question. Go ahead.
So one thing I wonder from Commissioner Hardesty and also from the professor, are you contemplating a reduced size of the police force? Are we going to divest sort of mental health and social service functions through this commission? Is that going to happen immediately or gradually? And if we have people like former police union, police association folks at the table, I mean, are they going to be at all on board with the sort of reduction in scope that needs to happen?
So I'm happy to jump in first. That's an easy one. The first answer is no. The police will never be on board with reducing their staff and their budget. And we're starting to see how the police respond to that now with the PR campaign that they're putting out there to pretend they could do reform if they just had more money and more bodies. But whether they've had more money or more bodies or not, they are not about to reform. I absolutely believe that we have too many police officers for the function that police should do. And I anticipate as we start having community dialogue around re-envisioning community safety, I mean, what we need is social workers, what we need are peer supporters. We need a lot of things more than we need more police officers with weapons on our street. And so I expect that as we continue to do this work, absolutely, I think that we're going to find that Portland Street Response is going to cover a lot of areas where traditionally police have shown up. What we're going to find is that the community is going to have a preference for non-armed, non-aggressive people to engage with when there is a call. I mean, if you think about the things community needs, we need mediation centers more than we need more armed weapons in our community. Many community neighborhood issues could be resolved long before anybody thinks I'm going to call the police because you're just not listening to me and doing what I want you to do. And so we have a great opportunity in this community to not settle for what we've always had, but to really envision what does community safety look like for everyone, regardless of your economic status, your race, or anything. That's what this piece is, a very small piece of overall reimagining community safety?
So to answer your question, so I'm going to give you one that you're not going to like, and I'll say a lot of times, is it will, under my proposal, once the police commission is established, they'll have to determine how they want to organize the department. So that'll have to be delayed. But one thing that I do offer in my proposal is that under this current city charter language, the chief of police is responsible for determining the way that the police department is, or the police bureau is organized. And so I do take that provision out of the current charter. So yes, I saw in one of your questions, would my proposal require change the charter? The answer is absolutely. And so what it would do is it would allow the police commission, in addition to the police chief, the ability to determine how the department's organized and what functions they serve. So long way of saying, it'll depend on what they decide later, if it exists.
Thank you both for answering that. We have Megan up next. If you have questions in the chat, I'm asking that you please raise your hand. We can answer them here. They've also dropped our PCCEP email, but obviously we have time now, so I would encourage you to get on the queue and we can get your question answered right here. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, for Commissioner Hardesty and Dr. Snell, are these separate proposals that you're talking about? I'm a little confused. Is the ballot measure that Commissioner Hardesty is proposing, is that in conjunction with Dr. Snell's?
No, it's not. No, it's
okay.
Proposals.
Okay.
They're separate, but I would be more than happy to have a combination or a merger, but they are separate at the moment.
And yeah, I have not seen Dr. Snell's proposal, but I'm also really open to looking at it, but because I think we have commonalities. The commonality primarily is the independence, and the unique issue in Dr. Snell's proposal is that the mayor would no longer be the supervisor of the police chief. You know, and I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I think there has to be an elected official who ultimately the buck stops with. You know, I'm happy. I would love to see Dr. Snell's proposal and have a conversation about that.
And just quickly, where can we read? Is there a place we can read the ballot measure proposal?
Sending it out to PCCEP if we haven't already. I believe we've already sent out a draft. We are still working the language, but we've sent out the most recent draft, and PCCEP will be able to share it with you.
Do you, Commissioner Hardesty, would you like me to share that? I didn't know that that was a public document.
Well, you know, it's still a work in progress. So if somebody wants it, I don't have any problem with them having it, but I would encourage you to stamp the draft so
Okay.
nobody assumes that it's a done deal yet.
Okay, I'll share it in the chat, stamped draft.
Okay, next we're gonna go with Joanna. I hope I pronounced that correct.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I have a question for Professor Snell about meaningful, what was raised earlier in the earlier section, meaningful investigatory and disciplining powers located in the commission and independent review. It's not clear to me that a commission in and of itself would make any difference. So I'd like to hear about that. And in your vision, how would the commission ensure that police misconduct was independently investigated and that officers were disciplined? I understand that the commission could always fire the police chief if they didn't like the way the police chief was disciplining people, but I didn't hear in your proposal how the commission itself would have those both investigatory and disciplining powers.
Okay, so answer to your question in terms of the way it would work, at least the way it works in the current city, is because the way it works now is that the police chief is ultimately responsible for officer discipline, right? Because the chief is top of the department, and then the mayor is the one that ultimately decides that discipline because the mayor is the commissioner. So what I'm proposing under the system.
Hang on, Joanna, can you mute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just getting some feedback. Go ahead, Professor.
So what my proposal does is it aligns with the Portland, the Police Review Board now, And basically, we could do one of two models. What I have now is that the police commission would be ultimately accountable for deciding the punishment, just like the police commissioner, the mayor is able to do now. That would just devolve to these 9. So they get to make that final decision. So if you remember the city auditor's table, the police commission would do those 2 last dots. So that's one recommendation. LA has another. I imagine police unions might have a problem with letting an appointed board do this. Another option that LA does is that the police commission makes recommendations, but it's ultimately up to the chief to impose that discipline. That's another option as well, but same deal. Because of that responsibility relationship, the chiefs don't usually get too far from their commission. So that's the first part of your question. Second part you were asking about, though, was the investigatory angle. And so what I'm proposing is taking the Independent Police Review Board, the IPR, and moving them under this agency. So what they'd be able to do are run parallel investigations. So you still have internal affairs and the other internal aspects of PPB running their investigations, but then the Inspector General or the IPR would be able to run parallel investigations to then present to the chief and the police commission duplicate reports. And that's basically the way that this would happen. So you'd still have not necessarily independence as much as parallelism, and then also that ultimate disciplinary power would fall under this body.
Thank you, Professor Snow. I just saw a good question in the chat. Can we hear other ideas? I do want to invite the community, if you have other suggestions for either of those proposals or things that we have not heard from, we would love to get input on that as well, as we do have a number of elected officials here. So I would invite you to raise your hand and give suggestions on what you would like to see changed, added, things of that nature. Yep, so we're gonna go with Sean, and then we're gonna go with Jackie.
I just wanted to say, one of the things, we had a meeting at the TAC last night, and one of the things that we passed was a call to expand what's known as the Public Safety Support Specialist Groups, for PS3s, which basically act as unarmed officers who don't have arrestability, to mostly handle lower level calls that don't necessarily need someone who's armed to arrive to them. Our recommendation is to expand it to about 75 people over time, as well as to require any new officer to spend time as a PS3 before they can become a full sworn officer, just to give time for A, for them to learn those soft skills that an officer needs, and to B, to give us as a community time to make sure that these people are actually the kind of people we want carrying guns in our community before they actually get those guns.
If I may, Elliot, could I can I comment on that proposal, please?
Sure.
What I'd like to say is we have failed with that P3 program. The way it was sold to the public was that these were going to be unarmed people in uniform who would actually deal with low-level, like taking reports, et cetera, low-level activity. They would be out on the street. They would be actually providing community support. The reality is that the city council made a mistake by allowing this particular unit to be connected with PPA, and which means that the Portland Police Association now actually sees these P3s as their assistants. And so what we were promised when this program was first passed is the absolute opposite of what we have. And so I would not support adding any more bodies into PPA because of how extremely difficult it is to get rid of people who we think should not actually work for the city of Portland. So just that minor feedback. If it was a program not connected with Portland Police Bureau at all, I think it would be a wonderful thing. But what we've seen is that the police presented it as what you have presented it as, but that's not what's happening today. And nor will happen in the future, because now it's part of the PPA bargaining negotiated union.
To respond a little bit, I can understand the concerns. One of the things that we do have is this is not adding additional people to the police bureau. This is replacing officers. And
but you're adding them into a dysfunctional system without actually changing the system. So you just can't have new people come into a dysfunctional system and expect them to operate differently. My humble opinion.
Thank you both. We're gonna go now to Jackie, and then there's a question from Matt that I found in the comments. Matt, I'm gonna ask you to restate that, and then we'll go with Amy after that. So Jackie, you're up.
Okay, I understand from Professor Snell's proposal that the commission would be responsible for negotiations on the union contract with PPP. Commissioner Hardesty, can you explain who would have the ultimate responsibility for those negotiations under your proposal?
The union contract negotiations would not change, but let me say what I have been able to help my colleagues put in place since I've been on the city council is as different as night and day to what we had prior to my arrival. The entire city council supported hiring an outside attorney that has expertise in negotiating public safety union contracts. And so that gentleman will be our lead negotiator on the Portland Police contract when we start talks again in January. In addition to that, we have a commitment and a set of ground rules that says any meeting hosted by the city of Portland is open to the public. Every other meeting is open to the public because when the meetings are at the Portland Police Association office, we cannot require them to open their building to the public. And so I don't anticipate that process changing because again, once we get the contract changes and get the legislative changes, we will have a much better opportunity to get the kind of contract that the community wants to see when it comes to our public safety employees.
Thank you. And one thing before we move on to the next comment from Matt, just want to also remind folks that we still do have Auditor Hull on the line. And so there's three kind of proposals that have been put out there. Professor's commission model, the ballot initiative would overhaul the current system, and then reform within the current, keeping the current IPR system under the auditor's plan. So just want to make sure folks can ask questions to any three of them or additionally present just ultimate thoughts, questions, ideas. So we're next going to go with Matt. If you want to unmute and ask your question around arbitration. Matt, you there? The question from Matt was, how do your plans address decisions that are overturned by an arbitrator? Do they have any impact on them? Oh, Matt, looks like you're there too now, so I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Okay, y'all three can respond to that.
It doesn't sound like he wants to add anything. I will just say I'm very intentional about knowing that we must make additional changes to arbitration. You may remember in a special session, we made some of the first changes that we've made in forever. But there's more work to be done around the arbitration bill. And we, again, plan to take that up in August when the legislature goes back into special session.
Yeah, not much to add except to say just it would really depend. You know, it would really depend on what the law says at the end.
Auditor, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
And that was, you're specifically talking about the arbitration piece?
Yes.
Yeah, I do think that that's a legal issue to resolve, and I don't think that the city gets to opt out of things like that. Necessarily in the labor contract as it exists now. So.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're gonna go with Amy.
Yeah, my question to the group is, has there ever been a major assessment done of our systems. For an example, I don't know if any of you remember back in 2010, we had an entire 3-day discussion, planning session with everyone around our emergency response systems, and it was an incredible eye-opening experience. And I was wondering if we've ever had any kind of major assessment of our entire city's planning operations, of how things actually function.
Well, I was almost ready to answer Amy's question until the last statement. So maybe I'm not, so yes, the city is required to do emergency management planning and to have an emergency management plan. The auditor reviews the actions of various departments within the city of Portland and makes recommendations after they've done the audit. And as you know, in the audit reports, there's always a statement from the bureau director about what changes they've implemented or whether or not they agree with the auditor's report. But honestly, until Portland Street Response, we had not made any changes to our 911 first responder system prior to us introducing Portland Street Response. We've had the same system since 1900s. The major change we made was making it from an all voluntary first responder system to a paid system. But we've done absolutely nothing since the 1900s to actually evaluate whether or not what worked back in 1900 still works in 2020. And I would recommend that it in fact doesn't, no way, shape, or form.
Thank you. That is kind of exactly what I was looking for, to see if there had been like a major evaluation of the efficiency. And I know the county also has a separate connection to some of the crisis line responding too. So we might have to merge our databases since we're a complex community.
You know, actually, I think we would do better as someone who manages fire and rescue, the Bureau of Emergency Management, and the Bureau of Emergency Communication. I can tell you that we waste millions, tens of millions of dollars in public resources every year responding to calls that we have absolutely no business responding to. So, for example, I can tell you that my firefighters show up on a regular basis to TriMet stops because somebody is asleep at the inn. And TriMet has trained their 3 security forces to not touch anyone. So if someone is asleep, they will call 911, get my 6-person fire engine to come to where they are and touch the person and ask them, do you need medical care? If they say no, then my fire engine is off to the next call. I anticipate that 50% of the 500,000 calls we get every year to 911 are unnecessary calls. And in fact, the biggest increase in calls have been of unwanted people. I'm not comfortable with what this person looks like. This person put a tent up outside my business. This person looks weird. Send the police. And so we will have to retrain the public that 911 is not the go-to when you are uncomfortable with what somebody looks like. And I'm going to start sending really big bills to private and public entities that think that fire is their personal service that they can call because they don't want to train their people appropriately.
Thank you for that. We are going to next go with Bonnie. I just want to remind folks too, once you've asked your question, if you can put your hand down just so we can keep that clear. I've heard some calls about wanting to hear from other folks too. This is this open space for the next 15 minutes or so. So if you have questions or you want to hear just from community members, I encourage you to voice those concerns. We also have the chairs of all the current Advisory Committee. So you can ask questions to them or just make comments in general. So the floor is the communities right now. We're going to go with Bonnie. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I wanted to ask Dr. Snell, didn't understand fully how the independent review was going to be independent if it's under the Police Bureau. So if you could talk about that a little bit, great.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. So like using my hand. So currently IPR is under the city auditor, right? And then you have PPB, which has its own investigative sub-entities like internal affairs, independent review. So they're the ones that conduct the investigations. Now, the police commission under my proposal would be on top of the police department, on top of the chief. And then what I would do is take the independent police review and make them kind of parallel or kind of an adjunct of the police commission so that they can conduct their own investigations and have that authority to conduct independent review separate or parallel to what's going on in internal affairs. So you get two different pair of eyes. So they're not under the department. Yeah, you're right. They're part of the police commission. They're still part of the department, but at a different and higher level. So at the police commission level, not under the department and subject to the police culture that's there. Does that kind of help? Do you have more questions, Bonnie?
Yeah. Who hires them?
Who would hire the police commissioners?
Who hires the investigative people, the employees that you're talking about?
So under the status quo, that's all city commissioners, or sorry, excuse me, city auditor's office, from what I understand. And so once that moves over to the police commission, they would then be responsible for hiring and firing staff that would be under them. So yeah, that's just different between what we have now versus what I proposed, because they'd be under their purview.
Okay, we are going to go with Dan, Angela, and we'll take maybe one or two more comments, and then we'll hear from Commissioner Hardesty and then Auditor Hall Caballero to close out the meeting. So if you have any final questions, get your hands up. Let us know what you got. Dan, you're up.
Oh, hi, Dan Handelman again from Portland Cop Watch. So a couple of years ago, the auditor put together a small work group that Commissioner Hardesty and I sat on. And one of the fundamental questions that was asked is whether or not the Citizen Review Committee will be allowed to have public input before they vote on findings about police misconduct cases. And ultimately, the City Council approved that and put it into the city code, which it was not for all the years, even though we've had that ability. It's now encoded. There was an argument at the time that no other police review system in the country has the ability for public members to speak at these hearings. So we shouldn't either. But City Council was wise enough to say we should be the leaders in this. Commissioner Hardesty, do you envision your future version of the oversight allowing the public to still have input when there are cases being heard about these misconduct cases?
I definitely do. I think they should happen in public. I think one of the things we hear over and over again is that these things happen behind closed doors, and the public has no clue about how decisions are made. I can tell you that it is important that we have a transparent system that is fair and just for police as well as for community members. There's way too often that community members who've suffered harm at the hands of the police do not find a welcoming arm either at IPR or at, and who thinks that they're gonna go to the police department and find a welcoming arm when they go to complain about police misconduct. I get those calls from people who say, I was treated like crap. I was not, they didn't even wanna take my complaint, right? So we have built a system that the public and the police don't trust. And now we have an opportunity to build something better. And so, yes, I absolutely expect that we would take public testimony, that we would, decisions would be made in the public so that the public gets to see the deliberative process. And what other laws and statutes we need to change to make that happen will provide a much more accountable police force to the community that is demanding that we do so.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have Angela up, and then we'll take maybe one or two more questions. So if you have any, please raise your hand and get them up there. Angela, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my question is for Commissioner Hardesty, and it's pertaining to the subpoena authority that she was talking about. I believe that was her. I was just wondering if that, I was just wondering what that kind of entails for the citizens. And because, for instance, if there's an ongoing investigation, police are able to withhold that information from the review board. And I think the sooner that they have it, the better, to be completely honest. I'm just wondering if that subpoena authority is part of that.
Yes, I mean, right now, a police officer could just not come, right? They could just,
Yeah.
and they have over and over again, right? And so we tell the public that we have a system of accountability, but the reality is that nothing makes police officers participate in the system that we have today. And in fact, many times they'll send a representative to come on their behalf. And so subpoena power means that police in the community have the same, we have the same expectation of community and police. If a police officer has been accused of wrongdoing, they need to show up and be held accountable for that behavior. They don't get to say, well, no, I'm not going to participate. That's what real accountability looks like, and that's what real transparency looks like. And we don't have any in our system today. I'm hopeful that the beginning will be putting this measure on the ballot to actually building a system again that the public and the police can trust. And
does that, sorry, does that mean that it includes like documents and such?
So you are getting into the very details. So let me be clear. The ballot measure that will be on the November ballot actually lays out the frame. We will have a year to actually work out all the details. How does the transition happen? Are there staff that will be hired in this new environment? What will that process be? Who will be in the seats, right? Who needs to be represented on an oversight board? I'm having those conversations now with a whole host of community-based organizations, and we will continue to have that conversation between now and November, because it is not going to be prescriptive based on what I want. It will be prescriptive based on what the public wants and what is legally able to do based on the changes that we've already talked about.
Okay, thank you. I actually have one more question. Do I have time?
You don't. I want to try and get to Emery. If you can drop it in the chat, and then we can pick it up on the tail end and have someone email you about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Angela. I want to get to Emery, but before that, I'm going to ask that each of the chairs of the committee would submit some recommendations to PCCEP about changes that they would like to see or improvements, and then have the commissioner, auditor, and professor also do, and we can just compile them into a document that will be available on our website for people to look at. And I'm also going to try get like a graphic that would like kind of show each of the committees and what they currently do and don't do. So that's what we'll have happen. Emery, you got the last question, and then we're going to close it out with the commissioner and the auditor.
Okay, thanks, Lakiana, and hi, everybody. I know it's late in the process, so my question is pretty simple. You know, we heard from a leader of one of the oversight bodies that, you know, when we have people leave our body, we lose knowledge that they've retained. And I've spoken with the auditor, and I've heard from people from IPR, like, we actually have a lot of knowledge built up. We've worked hard to get this to where it is. And so I guess my question is kind of for Commissioner Hardesty and the auditor, Ms. Hull Caballero, like, if we pass this proposal, are there concerns about losing knowledge or losing certain infrastructure that has been built up, or is there confidence that the expertise that the public has or certain investigators have will be able to carry forth? And you know, I think people might have some concerns about that reasonably. So thank you.
Commissioner Auditor, you want to
I was
respond?
waiting to see if the auditor wanted to weigh in since I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, we'd be happy to respond to that. And I appreciate the question. There is a lot of expertise in the system. I think you can listen to Candace, you can listen to Sean, you can listen to Lakiana and Ellie, and there's just lots of really bright people who are pushing hard to make the system better. The Professor Snell, I think, captured the question that I think the community should answer, and it's the governance question. And I realize that as I'm reading the chat, there's all these acronyms, there's all this stuff, there's all these moving pieces. It's a wildly complicated system. But what I was trying to do in my presentation was to show the pieces that have to exist in whatever oversight system there is. And Commissioner Hardesty has a model that she likes, Professor Schnell has a model he likes. There's other models that have been talked about, and I think that's the most exciting thing about this evening, is that this conversation has now begun, and I think who is going to make that decision is a question to put to the community, and I think that's a question that doesn't have any acronyms in it. It doesn't have all the mess that we have, because I think the expertise already exists. We do have very experienced investigators. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the system. Officers show up for all of the interviews. They're all, they are required by code to come and answer truthfully the questions during an investigation. When people come to IPR, we take their complaint, we apply resources to that complaint. Yes, some of them get dismissed, but there's reasons why they get dismissed, and those are articulated in the code. And I think the most important thing is no matter what model we go to, the confidentiality problems that exist in state law are going to apply to that model as well, because it's a state law. And so if the community could wrestle with some of these questions, I would refer you to the handout that I put in the chat. We've posed some questions that we think that the community should answer. We've also put a column in that document to show what the system looks like now. And we've made recommendations about what we would change. But I think the question rests with the community. Who do you want to make a decision about police discipline? And Professor Snell brought some other elements into play about governance, about who do you want to set those rules? Because any investigation, what the investigators are doing is they're looking at those work rules, and then they're saying, did the officer violate the work rule? And if the work rules aren't right, none of you people are going to be pleased with the next system either. And so there's just a lot to wrestle with, a lot of questions to answer. And again, I caution about racing into something in the charter when now is the moment for us to have those conversations and keep the momentum going, get the model refined to the way you want it. And then you're always going to need investigators, and I can't say enough good things about the investigators who work in my office and the managers and the policy analysts who work in my office. Taxpayers have already paid to develop all of that talent, and they are very talented. And so I think in any system that the community decides to have, who's going to make that decision, there's a great group of investigators who are ready to start delivering their information to those decision makers and staff.
So let me just say the auditor's own, it wasn't the auditors, actually it was the COO, Reinhardt, Tom Reinhardt's office put out a community survey about what did the community think about policing, and that was just maybe a little over a year ago, maybe two. Even the police don't trust discipline within the Portland Police Bureau. I would encourage you to go to the Office of Finance Administration, OFA. That study, that community survey is on their website. And it's also, I want you to know that what I'm sharing with you is not my opinion. It is based on 30 years of community banging their head against the wall, seeking a police department that is accountable to the public. We will have a long time after we pass this in November to take the time to put this commission together so that it works for the people of the city of Portland. Talented people will get hired all the time. I am not worried about losing expertise because there's a lot of expertise out in our community that never gets tapped into. And so it is important that this new system actually be developed in partnership with community. This old system was not. What the community developed, Mayor Vera Katz gave to the auditor, and he developed this. And what we have now has been tweaked many times. But at the end of the day, if the public has no confidence in the system and the police have no confidence in the system, why would we want to continue to pay for a failed system?
I think those kind of, go ahead. Yeah, no, you can just be closing comments, but if either of you have final things to say, I would use this time for another minute, maybe each, if you wanted to respond or close it out.
For me, I just want to say this is the beginning, not the end, of reimagining what community safety looks like. Police accountability is one tiny piece of it, but it's an important piece. And if you've been working on this as long as I have and realize how over and over and over again, police are not held accountable for egregious behavior, then you would be excited by this opportunity to have a broader conversation with the public about what we, the community, want as far as community safety is concerned. This is the beginning, not the end, and I look forward to working with all of you to actually develop a system that we all can have confidence in. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Auditor?
I just wanted to thank you all for inviting us here. We are really excited to participate in these discussions, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you. I want to just close this out by thanking all the community members, 170 of you or so, for being here for 2 hours on a Thursday evening. I want to thank our PCCEP staff for helping set this meeting up, our ASL interpreters for providing that interpretation, both the auditor and the commissioner for being here. This is not either of their first meeting for being at PCCEP, so we appreciate that. Who else am I missing on here? The reporters who are on the line, who are here today, who are also, risking their lives to bring us coverage not only of this, but of other things out in the community right now, and putting their bodies on the line to this. Also, Robert King from the mayor's office for being here as well. And the Portland Police Bureau, I believe, was here a little earlier and is probably still on the line. So thank you all. The committees that are doing this work, volunteer and otherwise, appreciate all of you. Stay up to date with PCCEP. We're on Instagram. No, we're not. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and on the website, so you can keep up with us. There will be more meetings like this where we can convene the community to have discussions that can be difficult, challenging, but are ultimately working to better serve our community. So thank you. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Wakiana.
Thank you, Dr. Snell, for also being here as well. Appreciate your input.
Thank you. Thank you.